Hello folks, today we're going to work on a paper LBO, a very simple one. These are commonly asked in private equity interviews, but sometimes investment banking as well. So let's take a quick look at this one. It's pretty straightforward here because we're given revenue growing 8% every year. We're kind of given the numbers for year zero. And we know that, we kind of know the entry and exit multiple as well. At 10 times, we know the debt, it's 50% financed by debt with a 10% interest rate, a 40% tax rate. COGS and SG&A, or selling, general, and administrative, stays constant as a percentage of revenue. Depreciation and amortization is just going to be flat throughout. So it's just going to be the same number, 10 million. This is in millions, let's say. So CapEx is going to be equal to D&A. So once again, flat. No changes in net working capital, so we don't have to worry about that affecting cash flow. Normally we deduct any increase in net working capital. There are no transaction fees, so that makes the sources and uses very easy. Finally, we're going to assume that no debt is paid off until the end. So normally in a complex, Excel-driven LBO, we assume that any cash we make is going to pay off the debt, also known as a cash flow sweep. But in this case, we're just going to assume that the cash is accumulated, so we just keep the cash. We don't actually pay down the debt until we actually sell the company, and then we'll use the debt, or sorry, the cash. So this is fairly easy. So let's get to it. The first thing we want to know is the first step to an LBO, after kind of making your assumptions, which are here, is to build a sources and uses. And this one will be quite simple because there's really only two sources of cash here, financing, equity and debt. Right, so that's quite straightforward. And then in terms of what it's going to be used for, well, there are no transaction fees, so it's just going to be really total uses because all the money is going to be used to pay for the company, and there are no transaction fees. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So equity, right now it's going to be 50% equity, 50% debt, and we know it's a 10 times multiple. So what we really need right now is to find EBITDA, because when I say 10 times, it's basically 10 times EV over EBITDA. Okay, great. So let's calculate that. The first thing we're going to calculate is gross profit. Now I'm going to make this negative because that way I won't get the direction mixed up. I can just add these, and it's just going to be 100 minus 50. It's 50 gross profit. And EBITDA is before D&A, so we're going to put it up there. And here we have our last 12 months EBITDA of year zero. So we can use this and multiply by 10 essentially to figure out how much the company is going to be worth. So let's try that. And of course, uses is going to be the same thing. And we'll have equity and debt here. So it's going to be just 0.5 times the total amounts because it's 50% financed by equity and debt. All right, so we're going to have, we'll call this year zero, year one. And so we'll have the future years out here. Now normally you would be doing this on paper. I'm just doing it on Excel because it's a bit easier to present, obviously. So obviously if you're doing this on paper, you're thinking to yourself, oh, I have to calculate all these numbers. You actually don't. You really just need to calculate revenue. So let me show you what I mean here. If I take revenue, right, and it says we're growing it by 8%, right? So let's put that in. Now, of course, you would have to calculate this with the calculator. Notice it says round to the nearest dollar, so I don't actually need these decimals. I can actually take out a decimal. So when you're calculating, you can just round it. It makes it a little easier to calculate. Now, it says COGS and SG&A will stay constant as a percentage of revenue. So that means I actually don't really need to calculate what COGS is and SG&A is. It's really not that important because if they're staying constant as a percentage of revenue, so COGS will be 50% of revenue, SG&A will be 20% of revenue. Well, guess what? EBITDA will also stay constant as a percent of revenue. So the margin is going to be kind of consistent throughout. So let's take a look at that. Basically, if I take 30 divided by 100, it's a 30% margin. And because the costs are staying constant, well, lo and behold, we have 30% margin. And if I have the margin, I can just take the revenue and multiply it by the margin. So this is a way to save a lot of time, because we don't really, to be honest, a paper LBO, you just want to get to the answer. So as I mentioned before, DNA is flat throughout, so it's just going to remain as 10 throughout. And in this situation, we'll deal with CapEx later. So let's just get down to EBIT right now, which will be, I'm going to once again make this negative so that I can just add the EBITDA and the DNA to figure out your EBIT. Oops, sorry about that. Press the wrong button there. Great. So now, as you can see, we have EBIT. So now we're going to try to get down to, well, we're trying to get down to unlevered free cash flow, right? Sorry. We're trying to get to, a cash flow that represents the cash that we have to, normally we use the payback debt, so it's actually more like levered free cash flow. Sorry, I didn't mean to say unlevered. So we have to take out interest expense, basically. So let's think about this for a second. If we have 150 of debt from over here, and we have a 10% interest rate, well, we just have to calculate 150 times 10%. So that's 15 interest expense. And this calculation is going to stay constant because we're not going to be paying down debt until we sell the company at the end of year 5. So every year there will be interest expense, including year 5, because we're still going to pay the interest and then we'll sell the company. All right, so now we can get down to earnings before tax. Now the next step is to apply the tax rate. In this case, it's 40%. Of course, 40% is the old tax rate for the U.S., but it's obviously changing. But let's just keep things aligned with the case study here. So we're going to take that earnings before tax, multiply by the 40% tax rate. Finally, we can get down to net income. Now you're probably wondering, okay, I've gone down to net income. How do I get to the cash flow that represents the cash I either accumulate or I can use to pay down debt? Normally you would start with the cash flow statement, and of course the cash flow statement starts with net income, and you would all that kind of stuff, if you're doing a 3-statement model. But we're not doing a 3-statement model. We're doing a paper LBO. So we're going to take shortcuts wherever possible. We know there's no changes in net working capital, so we don't have to worry about that. But there is CapEx. It's equal to DNA. So if I take the CapEx and I say, okay, CapEx is equal to DNA, now you're probably wondering, hold on. What about DNA? Don't we have to add that back as well? Yes, we do. DNA is a non-cash expense, so we're going to have to add back the DNA. Now, of course, if there were changes in net working capital, we'd also include that here, but there are none. So we'll just maybe I'll write that in just so you know where it goes. Net working capital, but of course it's 0. And this will basically get us to a. I'm going to zoom in a bit more just in case it's still small for folks. That should be better. Okay. Sorry, this will get us down to our cash flow. It's sort of like a levered cash flow, you could say. levered free cash flow. Okay, so now that we have levered free cash flow, we know that this cash is going to accumulate, right? We're not actually going to pay down any debt because it's a paper LBO. So let's see how much cash we have then. So where I'm going to do this is I'm going to just say, you know, it's going to be a sum of everything from year 0 onward. Now, actually, it's not year 0. Actually, I should clarify. You know, year 0 has actually already happened. So let's actually make it such that that becomes very evident. I'm going to add a little border to demonstrate that. So actually, I don't really care about the cash from year 0. I'm actually going to assume that it doesn't matter. So let's take that out actually, because we're really only going to be buying. We only own the company from year 1 onwards, right? So let's just do it from year 1 onwards. So of course, the first year will just be, you know, equal to the amount of cash we generate. But in future years, the total cash position is going to change because we'll be basically taking a sum of all the cash flows that that exist because we're not actually doing anything with it. So I just use the formula here where I fix the cell here so that it basically adds up all the accumulated cash flow. So in the end, we get 39 of cash. Okay, so now what's the next step? So after we figure out how much cash we have at the end, now we just need to figure out basically the enterprise value that we're going to be selling the company for. And we're selling it at 10 times EBITDA. So fortunately, we have EBITDA in year 5 right here. So we'll just take that, 44, and then times by the exit multiple of 10, which is the same as our entry multiple. Now this number, 441, does not represent the actual cash going to the equity yet, the equity holders, because we have to take out the debt. We have to pay back the debt, and then meanwhile, we will also add the cash because. So let's actually, before we go on, let's just do the debt first. So let's take the 150 of debt from right here, and we'll add the cash. So that's because cash can be used to pay down debt, right? So it will reduce the amount of debt we'll have. So we can just take the cash that's been accumulated over all these years, and then of course we'll add a negative sign to the debt, and then we'll have equity value at the. So this is basically what, if I sum these up, this is what the equity holders will be getting in year 5 after selling the company and dealing with the debt and the cash. So let's take a look at what IRR we will be getting from this. Sorry about that, wrong window there. All right. Okay, so we will be getting, well, first let's figure out the cash outflow. So the cash outflow, we know we're putting up 150 of equity in year 0 because it's half financed by debt. I'm going to just put in the zeros in each of these years because you need the zeros for the IRR formula to work. We know we'll be getting 330 of equity in year 5 when we sell the company. So I'm going to do this 2 ways. First, I'll show you the IRR Excel method, and then I'll show you the IRR CAGR, because if you're doing a paper LBO, you won't be able to do the formula. But I'll show you the formula first. It's just equals IRR, and you just select from year 0 to 5, which is 17%. And you'll see this makes sense, by the way, because if you know, like, basically if it doubles, it's 15%. If it triples, it's 25%. If it goes up by 1.5 times, then it's 20%. So this makes sense because it's just a little bit more than 15%, which reflects the fact that it's just doubled, a bit more than doubled. Now, how do we actually calculate the IRR using the compounded annual growth rate method? First of all, I should note that this only works if you don't have any cash flows in the middle, which you don't. Now, because of that, we can use this. So let's take the final year cash flow and divide it by the beginning. Now, here's the thing. It's going to be negative because of the year 0 being negative. So let's add a negative sign to make it not negative. Now, we're not quite done yet because now we have to basically take it to the power of 1 over 5 because it's 5 years. And in addition to that, we also have to subtract 1. And as you can see, that gets us 17% as well. Sometimes people will also ask for the multiple capital, which is fairly easy to calculate. I'll move it over here. It's just the year 5 divided by year 0. So how much have you generated from your capital? So that's 2.2. I added a negative sign, of course, because this is negative here. So there you go. That's how you do a paper LBO.